The crunch of tire treads crushing my perfect grass is not a sound I'll ever forget, especially when it's the 47th time on my own front lawn. There was Marlene Kensington again, rolling her spotless white BMW right over my prize-winning turf like she owned it. Sharp heels clicked across my ruined grass, clipboard clutched like a royal scepter. The first time I said politely,
"Marlene, could you please not park on my lawn?"
She barely glanced up.
This is HOA business, Eugene. Your grass will grow back. Don't be so dramatic.
The 10th time, I knew it was disrespect. By the 47th time, I realized she was daring me to snap. What this suburban dictator didn't know? While she was playing HOA queen, this retired engineer was building a trap she'd never see coming. One $5 can of expanding foam was about to end her reign forever. What happens next will have you screaming with satisfaction. Where are you watching from? Ever dealt with an HOA Karen? Look, I'm not the type to cause trouble. At 63, I'd spent the better part of 4 decades solving problems. First as a mechanical engineer designing manufacturing systems, then as a weekend inventor tinkering in my garage workshop. My wife Sandra used to joke that I could fix anything except her tendency to overwater the houseplants. Our corner lot in Meadowview Estates represented everything I valued: precision, order, and quiet pride. The lawn wasn't just grass, it was my masterpiece. Every Saturday morning you'd find me out there with my vintage Craftsman mower, cutting in perfect diagonal patterns that would make a baseball groundskeeper weep. The edges were so sharp you could cut paper on them. I'd named all my tools, a quirk that made Sandra roll her eyes but secretly smile. There was Reliable Rita, the socket wrench, Steady Eddie, the level, and my pride and joy, Precise Pete, the micrometer I'd owned since engineering school. My workshop smelled like WD-40 and possibilities, with every tool hanging in its designated spot on pegboard I'd measured twice and cut once. But retirement hadn't been kind to our savings. Forced out at 61 when my company downsized, I'd been scraping by on a reduced pension and whatever handyman work I could find. The diabetes diagnosis last year meant constant monitoring, testing strips, and medication costs that ate into our already tight budget. Some days my hands would shake just enough to make precision work frustrating. That lawn was my sanctuary. Every blade of Kentucky bluegrass represented control in a world that increasingly felt chaotic. When Sandra's early-stage dementia started showing symptoms 2 years ago, moments of confusion and forgotten names, that perfect green rectangle became even more precious. It was the one thing I could still keep absolutely perfect. Then Marlene rolled up. Marlene Kensington, HOA president and walking embodiment of everything wrong with suburban power structures. At 49, she'd never worked a day in her life but somehow felt qualified to run everyone else's. Her great-grandfather's steel fortune had funded her lifestyle of charity galas, designer handbags, and the unshakable belief that convenience was her birthright. She treated the HOA presidency like her personal kingdom. She'd inherited the position when the previous president moved away, and somehow managed to keep getting re-elected through a combination of deep pockets and strategic intimidation. Her white BMW 540i, always spotless, always perfectly detailed, became a symbol of her authority as she cruised the neighborhood looking for violations to cite. The community center sat directly behind my property, separated by a small strip of decorative landscaping. The designated parking lot held 43 spaces, clearly marked and perfectly adequate for normal community events. But Marlene had discovered something that changed everything. If she cut across my front lawn, she could park 15 feet from the community center's side door instead of walking the 50 yards from the actual parking area. It started innocently enough. Marlene had been setting up for a charity luncheon and claimed her high heels made the gravel parking lot dangerous. I watched from my kitchen window as her BMW's tires left the first set of tracks in my grass, deep, muddy ruts that would take weeks to repair. When I politely approached her afterward, Marlene barely glanced up from her clipboard. "Oh, that? I'm sure it'll grow back." I was doing important community work. The dismissal in her voice carried the weight of inherited privilege and absolute certainty that her convenience trumped my property rights. That night, I stood in my workshop running my fingers along Reliable Rita's worn handle, staring at those tire tracks through the window. Sandra found me there at midnight, still holding the wrench, still staring. You okay, honey? I turned to face my wife, noting how the workshop's fluorescent light caught the silver in her hair. I will be. The second time Marlene drove across my lawn, I was ready with what I thought was a reasonable solution. I'd spent Sunday afternoon at Home Depot, carefully selecting 50 feet of decorative rope and 8 small posts. Nothing aggressive, nothing hostile, just a gentle reminder that my property had boundaries. The rope barrier looked perfect, elegant white marine rope strung between dark green posts, the kind you'd see at a country club. I'd measured everything twice, ensuring the posts lined up exactly parallel to my driveway. From my workshop window, it looked both functional and tasteful. Marlene's response came Thursday afternoon. I was calibrating precise Pete when I heard the distinctive sound of rope snapping under pressure. Through the window, I watched her BMW push straight through my barrier like it was made of tissue paper. The carefully positioned posts toppled over, dragging torn rope through the mud her tires were creating. This time, she didn't even slow down. What happened next taught me something important about the difference between engineering problems and people problems. When a machine breaks, you can identify the failure point, replace the damaged component, and expect it to work properly. When a person breaks, well, that's a whole different kind of problem. Friday morning brought a crisp white envelope in my mailbox. The Meadowview Estates letterhead looked official, the language carefully crafted to sound both professional and threatening. Dear Mr. Fletcher, it has come to our attention that you have installed unsightly barriers on your property that create safety hazards for community emergency access. Per HOA Covenant Section 4.2.7, all property modifications must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee. Failure to remove these barriers within 72 hours will result in a $150 fine for each day of non-compliance. Sincerely, Marlene Kensington, HOA President. I read the notice 3 times, my engineering mind automatically analyzing the logic. Emergency access? My rope barrier was set back 20 feet from the street, nowhere near any emergency vehicle path. Architectural Review Committee? I'd checked. Decorative fencing under 3 feet didn't require approval. But here's what I'd learned during 35 years of solving mechanical problems. Sometimes you have to step back and study the whole system, not just the broken part. This wasn't really about ropes or posts or emergency access. This was about power, and Marlene had just demonstrated exactly how she intended to use hers. Saturday morning found me in my workshop, spreadsheet open on Sandra's old laptop documenting everything. Timestamps, photographs, weather conditions, the exact depth of tire ruts in different soil moisture levels. If Marlene wanted to play the documentation game, she'd picked the wrong engineer. Sandra brought me coffee around 10, studying the precise measurements and detailed notes covering my workbench. You know, honey, your dad always said the best way to deal with a bully is to become something they can't control. I looked up from my calculations. What did he mean by that? I don't think he ever figured it out. Sandra's laugh carried just a hint of sadness. But you will. The fine notice arrived Monday morning. $150 for non-compliance with architectural standards. I'd removed the rope barrier within 6 hours of receiving the original notice, but apparently Marlene had photographed it at 8 a.m. Sunday morning, technically making me 44 hours late. I paid the fine that afternoon, but not before making a copy of the check and filing it in a new folder labeled Marlene Documentation. I'd started thinking like an engineer again, treating this as a systems problem that required data collection and analysis. Tuesday brought the mini twist that changed everything. I was replacing the sprinkler heads Marlene's BMW had crushed when I noticed something odd about the tire tracks. The pattern showed she wasn't just cutting across randomly, she was following the exact same path every time. Same entry angle, same exit point, same spot where she always stopped to check her makeup in the rearview mirror. Engineers love predictable patterns. They make calculations possible. Wednesday afternoon, while Marlene was inside the community center organizing another charity event, I walked her path with a measuring tape, 43 steps from street to parking spot. Same line of travel each time. The ground was slightly softer near step 37, where her front tire always paused as she adjusted her steering. That night in my workshop, I pulled out a piece of graph paper and started sketching. Not a barrier this time, something different. Something that worked with Marlene's predictable behavior instead of against it. Sandra found me there past midnight, surrounded by calculations and automotive engineering manuals. Still working on your people problem? I looked up, my eyes bright with the focused energy she remembered from my younger days. Not a people problem anymore. This is a physics problem. The private property signs were my next attempt at reasonable communication. 4 aluminum posts, professionally printed yellow signs with bold black lettering, private property, no vehicle access, violators will be towed. I'd researched the exact wording to ensure legal compliance, even called the non-emergency police line to verify my property rights. The signs looked official, authoritative, and completely clear. I positioned them strategically along Marlene's preferred route, impossible to miss even if you were texting while driving, which, as I'd observed through my workshop window, Marlene frequently was. The morning after installation, I felt genuinely optimistic. Surely even someone as entitled as Marlene would respect clearly posted property boundaries. This was America, where property rights meant something, where no trespassing carried legal weight. I should have known better. Thursday afternoon brought the sound of metal crunching and signs clattering to the ground. Through my window, I watched Marlene's BMW push through my carefully positioned signs like a tank rolling through a peace protest. 2 signs bent completely over, 1 post snapped at ground level, yellow aluminum scattered across my lawn like automotive confetti. But this time was different. This time, Marlene brought friends. 3 catering trucks followed her BMW across my property, their combined weight turning my carefully maintained lawn into something resembling a construction zone. Deep ruts carved through grass that had taken me 2 seasons to establish. My underground sprinkler system, 20 years of careful installation and maintenance, crunched and snapped under commercial truck tires. The smell of diesel exhaust hung heavy in the afternoon air, mixed with the earthy scent of torn roots and displaced soil. I stood at my workshop window watching my pride and joy transform into a muddy wasteland, and felt something shift inside my chest. Not anger exactly. Engineers don't solve problems with anger. This was colder, more focused. This was calculation. Friday morning's envelope contained 2 surprises. First, another violation notice, this time citing me for hostile signage that creates unwelcoming community atmosphere. Second, an invoice for $847 to repair irrigation damage to community center landscaping caused by improperly installed signs. I read the invoice 3 times before the audacity fully registered. Marlene was billing me for damage her trucks had caused to community property while using my lawn as a parking lot. The paperwork listed sprinkler line disruption, turf restoration, and emergency landscaping services, all for repairs to community center irrigation that I knew for a fact had been broken for months. But here's what 40 years of engineering experience teaches you. When someone hands you data that doesn't make sense, you dig deeper. I spent Saturday afternoon with my neighbor Tom Brennan, a retired insurance adjuster who'd watched Thursday's destruction from his kitchen window. "You see where those trucks went after they crossed your place?" Tom asked, pointing toward the community center. "Straight through the flower bed by the main entrance. Snapped off 3 sprinkler heads that were already busted. I know because I've been watching water pool there every morning for 2 months." Sunday brought my moment of clarity. I was in my workshop, studying the invoice line by line, when Sandra appeared with fresh coffee and a question that cut straight to the heart of everything. "Honey, when you were designing factory systems, what did you do when someone kept sabotaging the production line?" I looked up from the paperwork. "You document the sabotage, then design around the saboteur. And if they kept escalating, you let them escalate until they made a mistake big enough to get themselves fired." Sandra smiled, the expression that had captured my heart 40 years ago still lighting up her face. "So what mistake is Marlene going to make?" That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. First to my insurance company, reporting property damage and requesting a claims adjuster. Second to the county clerk's office, requesting copies of all HOA covenants and community center maintenance records. Third to my neighbor's son, Danny, a journalism student at the state university who'd been looking for an investigative project. "You interested in a story about HOA corruption?" I asked. "Is there any other kind of HOA story?" Monday's mini twist arrived in the form of Marlene's response to my insurance claim. She'd filed a counterclaim alleging that my improperly installed signs had created a traffic hazard that forced her to take evasive action across my property. Her statement described a near miss with an elderly pedestrian that never happened, supported by photographs of sign damage that she'd caused herself. But Marlene had made one crucial error. Her counterclaim included timestamps that didn't match the catering truck's arrival schedule. According to her story, she'd swerved to avoid the imaginary pedestrian at 2:15 p.m., but my photos showed the catering trucks already on my property at 2:10 p.m., following the exact same path. Engineers love it when the math doesn't add up in someone else's favor. Marlene's charity gala was scheduled for Saturday, October 15th, her biggest social event of the year. The Autumn Elegance fundraiser for children's literacy had been promoted in the community newsletter for 6 weeks, complete with promises of valet parking, wine tasting, and live jazz. 53 confirmed guests, including the mayor's wife and 2 city council members. I learned about the expanded guest list from the official notice posted on my front door Wednesday morning. Not a request, not a courtesy heads up, a formal notification that my entire front yard had been designated as overflow parking for Saturday's event. Dear Mr. Fletcher, the letter began, due to overwhelming community response to this important charitable endeavor, the Architectural Review Committee has temporarily designated your front lawn as auxiliary parking to ensure adequate accommodation for our distinguished guests. This designation is effective Saturday, October 15th, from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. under HOA Emergency Provisions Article 9.3.1. I had to admire the legal creativity, even as my hands trembled slightly from morning blood sugar fluctuations. Article 9.3.1 actually dealt with snow removal equipment access during winter emergencies. Marlene had simply invented a charitable parking emergency. Saturday afternoon arrived crisp and clear, perfect autumn weather that made my destroyed lawn look even worse by comparison. From my workshop window, I watched the setup begin. A professional event company arrived at 2 p.m. with white tents, tables, and a portable bar. Everything positioned on the community center grounds. Everything elegant and expensive. Then came the cars. 53 vehicles, from luxury sedans to the mayor's wife's Tesla, each driver directed by white-gloved valets to park on my property, not just the front yard anymore. They were using my side yard, my driveway, and even the carefully maintained strip of grass between my fence and the sidewalk. The sound was devastating. 53 sets of tires rolling across what had once been my masterpiece, turning 2 years of careful cultivation into a muddy parking lot. The smell of exhaust mixed with fresh soil and crushed grass created a nauseating combination that reminded me of construction sites and broken promises. But Marlene's masterstroke came at 6 p.m. when the local newspaper photographer arrived to document the record-breaking charitable attendance. The headline practically wrote itself, "Community Comes Together for Children's Literacy." Photos of smiling guests, elegant table settings, and in the background, my destroyed property serving as evidence of neighborhood cooperation. I stood in my workshop, watching through Venetian blinds as photographer flashbulbs captured my humiliation for posterity. Sandra found me there, gripping reliable Rita so tightly my knuckles had gone white. "You know what your father would say right now?" she asked quietly. "What?" "He'd say this isn't about your lawn anymore." She was right. This wasn't about grass or property rights or even money. This was about power, and Marlene had just demonstrated exactly how much she thought she had. 53 witnesses to my helplessness, official photography documenting my defeat, a newspaper article that would make me look like either a pushover or a curmudgeon who opposed children's literacy. Sunday's cleanup revealed the full scope of destruction. My insurance adjuster, a methodical woman named Patricia who reminded me of my favorite engineering professor, walked the property with a digital camera and measuring tape. "I've seen parking lot damage before," she said, photographing tire ruts that had carved 6-inch gouges through my topsoil. "But this is residential property, someone's personal yard. This is going to be expensive to restore properly." The estimate came Monday morning, $8,200 for complete lawn restoration, sprinkler system replacement, and soil remediation. My homeowner's policy would cover $6,000 after the deductible, leaving me responsible for $2,200 I didn't have. But Monday also brought the mini twist that changed my entire perspective on the problem. Danny Brennan, the journalism student, had spent Sunday researching HOA financial records at the county courthouse. What he'd discovered made my pulse quicken despite my afternoon medication. "Mr. Fletcher, you need to see this," Danny said, spreading photocopied documents across my kitchen table. "Marlene's charity events, she's been filing tax exemptions claiming all the associated costs as community maintenance expenses, including lawn damage repair." I studied the paperwork with an engineer's eye for detail. Insurance claims for community beautification projects, tax deductions for charitable facility maintenance, all filed in Marlene's name, all claiming reimbursement for expenses related to property damage during charitable events. "She's been doing this for 3 years," Danny continued, "making money off destroying people's property, then claiming the repairs as tax-deductible community service." I leaned back in my kitchen chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced in months, the satisfaction of understanding how a complex system actually worked. This wasn't random cruelty. This was systematic fraud, and fraud left paper trails. Engineers love paper trails. Tuesday morning brought the phone call that changed everything. Danny Brennan's voice carried the excitement of a journalism student who'd just uncovered his first real story. "Mr. Fletcher, you need to meet me at the courthouse, like right now. I found something huge." I drove downtown with Sandra, my hands steady on the wheel despite the morning insulin adjustment. The courthouse smelled like old paper and floor wax, familiar scents that reminded me of the patent office visits from my engineering days. Danny was waiting in the records room, surrounded by manila folders and photocopied documents. "Look at this," Danny said, spreading papers across the table like a detective revealing crucial evidence. 3 years of tax filings, insurance claims, and HOA financial reports. Marlene's not just stealing from you. She's been running a systematic fraud operation. The documents told a story that made my engineering mind race. Every charity event Marlene organized generated 2 types of paperwork: public records showing community donations and support, and private insurance claims for accidental property damage during community service activities. "See this?" Danny pointed to a claim from October 2021. "Autumn literacy fundraiser, 42 cars, $6,800 in lawn damage to 3 different properties. But look here." He flipped to another document. "She filed for $12,000 in tax deductions, claiming the repair costs were community beautification expenses she paid out of her own pocket." Sandra leaned over my shoulder, studying the numbers with the careful attention she'd once applied to balancing our household budget. "She's claiming the same expense twice, once as a charitable deduction, once as community improvement." "Gets better," Danny continued. "The insurance payouts go to an LLC she created called Meadowview Community Services. Technically legal since she's the HOA president, but guess what? The LLC pays all its contracts to her cousin's landscaping company in Tennessee. Money goes in, work never gets done, profits get divided between family members." I felt the familiar sensation of pieces clicking into place, like when a complex engineering problem finally revealed its elegant solution. This wasn't about parking convenience or even power tripping. This was about money, significant money, generated by systematically destroying neighbors' property and exploiting charitable tax loopholes. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. Danny pulled out a calculator and started adding figures from different documents. "Over 3 years, she's generated approximately $47,000 in fraudulent insurance claims and tax deductions. That's federal tax fraud, insurance fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty as HOA president." The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of courthouse business. I stared at the paperwork, my mind automatically calculating the implications. This wasn't just about my lawn anymore. This was about every neighbor who'd been bulldozed by Marlene's charity events, every family who'd paid increased HOA fees to cover her fraudulent expenses. "There's more," Danny said quietly. "I called the Tennessee landscaping company yesterday, pretended to be a customer looking for references. Turns out they've never done any work in our county, ever. All those bills for lawn restoration, pure fiction." Sandra reached across the table and touched my hand. "What does this mean legally?" "It means," I said slowly, my voice carrying the weight of 35 years of systematic problem solving, "that Marlene just became a federal case. Insurance fraud crosses state lines when fake companies are involved. Tax fraud brings in the IRS, and if I can prove intentional property destruction for financial gain—" I didn't finish the sentence, but Danny nodded understanding. "Criminal charges, real jail time, not just fines or community service." I gathered the documents carefully, my engineer's mind already organizing them into logical sequences and clear evidence chains. For 3 months, I'd been treating this like a neighbor dispute, trying to solve it with barriers and signs and reasonable conversation. But this wasn't a neighbor dispute. This was a crime in progress, and I'd been the unwitting victim providing evidence of ongoing criminal activity every time Marlene drove across my lawn. Danny, I need you to make copies of everything. Sandra, call our insurance company and tell them we need to amend our claim to include suspected fraud investigation. And I need to make a phone call. To who? Sandra asked. My smile carried the satisfaction of an engineer who'd finally identified the critical failure point in a complex system. The FBI. Turns out they have a whole department that specializes in this kind of thing. My workshop transformed into a command center over the next 2 weeks. The pegboard that once held only tools now displayed a timeline of Marlene's activities, insurance documents, and a hand-drawn map of every property she'd damaged during charity events. Sandra joked that it looked like something from a detective show, but I recognized it as what engineers call systems analysis, breaking down complex problems into manageable components. The expanding foam solution had come to me Tuesday night while researching automotive repair techniques. I'd been looking for ways to document tire damage when I stumbled across a forum discussion about expanding foam applications. Originally designed for filling gaps in construction, the stuff had interesting properties. It expanded to 3 times its original volume when exposed to pressure, hardened within minutes, and formed chemical bonds with rubber that required industrial solvents to break. Here's how it works, I explained to Sandra, sketching the mechanism on graph paper. Standard expanding foam canister, the kind you buy at any hardware store for $5. I drill a hole in this ground where Marlene always parks her front tire, insert the canister neck up, cover it with a thin layer of sod. When her tire rolls over it, the weight crushes through the grass and punctures the canister top. Foam expands instantly, grows up around the tire, and hardens like concrete. Sandra studied my sketch with the careful attention she'd once applied to my engineering blueprints. Will it hurt the car permanently? Nope. Embarrassing and expensive to remove, but no permanent damage. The foam bonds with rubber, not metal, so it'll take a professional tow service about 2 hours with industrial solvents to cut her free. Cost her maybe $300, teach her a lesson about trespassing, and give us photographic evidence of exactly where she parks. The legal strategy required more delicate coordination. Danny Brennan had connected me with Maria Santos, a federal prosecutor who specialized in white-collar fraud cases. Maria couldn't officially advise me on anything resembling vigilante justice, but she could explain federal evidence requirements for insurance fraud prosecutions. Documentation is everything, Maria had explained during our unofficial coffee meeting. Dates, times, witnesses, photographs. If someone were hypothetically documenting ongoing fraud, they'd want clear evidence of intentional property damage, false insurance claims, and a pattern of deceptive behavior. Video evidence is particularly compelling. My neighbor Tom had volunteered his security cameras for expanded coverage. Tom's system already captured the street approach to my property, but we repositioned one camera to focus specifically on Marlene's preferred parking spot. High-definition video with timestamps would provide undeniable evidence of trespassing and the exact moment of foam activation. The financial calculations fascinated my methodical mind. Marlene's next charity event, the Holiday Hope Gala scheduled for November 12th, was projected to host 65 guests. Based on her established pattern, she'd file insurance claims for approximately $9,000 in property damage, while claiming $15,000 in tax deductions for repairs that would never happen. But this time, I'd be ready with real costs and real consequences. Wednesday afternoon brought the foam canister installation. I'd purchased 3 different types of expanding foam to test expansion rates and bonding strength. The winner, Great Stuff Pro, a professional-grade foam designed for commercial applications. It expanded faster, bonded stronger, and came with a satisfaction guarantee that made me chuckle given the circumstances. The installation itself took precision worthy of my engineering background. I measured Marlene's tire placement from 5 different charity events, identifying the exact coordinates where her front wheel always stopped. 6 inches from my driveway edge, 18 inches from the decorative boulder Sandra had placed there 3 summers ago. The hole was 4 inches deep, just enough to seat the canister securely while keeping the activation trigger near ground level. I covered the installation with a carefully cut piece of sod, watering it lightly to maintain natural appearance. From 3 feet away, the spot looked perfectly normal. Friday brought the alliance that would make everything possible. I'd never considered myself a community organizer, but 3 months of documentation had revealed something important. I wasn't Marlene's only victim. The Hendersons had lost their front flower garden to last year's spring fundraiser. The Patels were still fighting insurance claims from summer damage. The Johnsons had simply given up and moved to Arizona. "She's been using our properties like her personal parking lots for 3 years," Mrs. Henderson said during the impromptu meeting in my kitchen. "Insurance barely covers half the damage, and she just keeps escalating." By Sunday, I'd assembled what Sandra dubbed the Foam Coalition. 7 families with documented property damage, 2 security camera systems, 1 journalism student with research skills, and 1 federal prosecutor who'd expressed interest in attending the next charity event as a concerned community member. Everything was ready. Marlene just had to park in the wrong spot one more time. The harassment letter arrived Monday morning, 3 weeks before Marlene's Holiday Hope Gala. I recognized the law firm letterhead immediately. Whitman, Burke & Associates, the expensive downtown firm that rich people used when they wanted to intimidate regular folks into submission. "Cease and desist order," the header announced in bold legal font. What followed was 2 pages of precisely crafted intimidation designed to convince me that documenting Marlene's behavior constituted criminal stalking. "Our client, Miss Marlene Kensington, has become aware of your systematic surveillance of her legitimate community activities," the letter stated. "Your installation of recording equipment, coordination with neighbors to monitor her movements, and creation of written documentation regarding her HOA duties constitutes harassment under State Statute 647.6. Continuation of these activities will result in immediate legal action, including restraining orders and civil damages." I read the letter twice, my engineer's mind automatically analyzing the legal logic. The beautiful thing about threats was how much they revealed about the person making them. Marlene knew I was documenting her behavior. She knew other neighbors were involved. Most importantly, she was scared enough to spend serious money trying to shut down my investigation. Sandra found me in the workshop that evening, studying the cease and desist notice alongside my growing file of evidence. "You worried about this?" she asked. "Nope." My voice carried the calm confidence of someone who'd spent decades solving complex problems. "This tells me we're winning. When someone starts threatening lawsuits to prevent you from taking pictures on your own property, they're not operating from a position of strength." Tuesday brought Marlene's next escalation, a formal HOA board meeting called specifically to address neighborhood surveillance concerns and privacy violations. The meeting notice, posted on every door in the community, painted me as a dangerous obsessive who'd been stalking board members and violating community trust. "There will be a formal vote regarding Mr. Fletcher's continued residence in Meadowview Estates," the notice concluded. "Community safety requires decisive action against individuals who threaten the peaceful enjoyment of our neighborhood." I'd never attended an HOA board meeting, but I understood bureaucratic warfare from my corporate days. Marlene was trying to use official processes to eliminate her primary witness before the Holiday Hope Gala. If she could get me expelled from the community, my evidence would become legally questionable, and my expanding foam trap would become impossible to execute. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday night, 7:30 p.m. in the community center. I spent Wednesday evening preparing like I used to prepare for patent hearings, organized documentation, clear talking points, and backup plans for every possible objection. But Wednesday night also brought the mini twist that shifted the entire power dynamic. Danny Brennan called at 9:47 p.m., his voice tight with excitement and exhaustion. "Mr. Fletcher, I just got off the phone with a contact at the IRS. They've been investigating Meadowview Community Services, LLC for 6 months as part of a larger fraud task force. Marlene's charity tax deductions triggered an algorithm that flags suspicious patterns." I set down my coffee cup carefully. "What kind of patterns?" "Charitable deductions that exceed reported income, LLC transactions that don't match claimed business activities, and insurance claims filed in conjunction with tax exemption requests. Turns out your case isn't unique. They're seeing this scam in HOA communities across 3 states. The implications hit me like a perfectly designed solution to an impossible problem. Marlene wasn't just running a local fraud operation. She was part of a larger criminal pattern that federal agencies were already investigating. My documentation hadn't just captured evidence of individual crimes, it had provided crucial data points in a multi-state case. There's more, Danny continued. The IRS agent wants to attend Thursday's board meeting, not officially, just as a concerned community member interested in HOA financial transparency, and she's bringing a colleague from the FBI's white-collar crime division. Thursday night's board meeting became the most well-attended in Meadowview Estates history. 53 residents packed into the community center, including several I'd never seen before who carried briefcases and took detailed notes. Marlene presided from behind the head table, her usual confident demeanor slightly strained as she called the meeting to order. We're here to address serious concerns about privacy violations and surveillance activities that threaten our community's peaceful character, Marlene began, her voice carrying the authority she'd wielded unchallenged for 3 years. But when she asked for testimony supporting my expulsion, something unexpected happened. Mrs. Henderson stood up first, followed by the Patels, then the Johnsons who'd driven back from Arizona specifically for this meeting. One by one, neighbors shared their stories of property damage, insurance struggles, and intimidation tactics. I didn't say a word. I just sat in the back row, watching Marlene's carefully constructed narrative collapse under the weight of community testimony, knowing that 2 federal investigators were recording every word for evidence in a case that was much bigger than anyone in that room realized. The Holiday Hope Gala invitations went out Friday morning, but this time Marlene's approach was different. Instead of her usual casual entitlement, she'd launched a full-scale public relations campaign designed to paint the event as essential community service and anyone opposing it as anti-charity extremists. The local newspaper ran a feature story. HOA president organizes record-breaking holiday fundraiser despite neighbor harassment. Marlene had somehow convinced the editor that my documentation efforts represented a coordinated attack on charitable giving in the community. The article included a photo of her standing beside my damaged lawn, describing it as necessary sacrifice for the greater good of children's literacy programs. I read the article twice, noting how skillfully Marlene had reframed the narrative. She wasn't a property destroyer anymore. She was a charitable hero being persecuted by selfish neighbors who valued grass more than hungry children. The article even quoted an unnamed community leader who suggested that some residents prioritize personal aesthetics over community welfare. She's good, Sandra observed, reading over my shoulder. Evil, but good at it. Sunday brought the event logistics that confirmed my expanding foam trap would get its opportunity. Marlene's assistant posted detailed parking instructions on the community bulletin board. 65 confirmed guests, valet parking provided, and auxiliary parking areas that included my entire front yard. But this time, Marlene had added a new wrinkle. Professional photography and videography, courtesy of Channel 7 News, would document the largest charitable gathering in Meadowview Estates history. The coverage would air during the Monday morning news program, showcasing community cooperation and charitable spirit. I realized Marlene was planning to use media coverage to make her property destruction look like voluntary community participation. If my lawn appeared on television serving as event parking, it would create public record suggesting I'd agreed to the arrangement. Monday morning brought Maria Santos, the federal prosecutor, posing as a potential event donor interested in tax deduction documentation. Her conversation with Marlene, conducted in full view of my workshop window, lasted 47 minutes and covered every aspect of charitable event organization, insurance procedures, and property usage protocols. Ms. Kensington was very thorough in explaining how she handles property damage during events, Maria told me afterward. She specifically mentioned that homeowner insurance typically covers accidental damage during community activities, and that she helps residents file claims to ensure proper documentation. She also mentioned that property owners often receive tax benefits for donating land use to charitable causes. I understood immediately. Marlene had just detailed her entire fraud mechanism to a federal prosecutor, including the tax evasion component that I hadn't even suspected. She was claiming that property owners were voluntarily donating land use, then helping them file fraudulent insurance claims for accidental damage, while she collected tax deductions for organizing community charitable activities. Tuesday brought the setup that would make everything visible to maximum witnesses. Channel 7 News scheduled their arrival for 5:30 p.m., half an hour before event start time, to capture guest arrivals and document community participation in charitable giving. The photographer would position near the community center entrance with my property clearly visible in background shots. Wednesday night, I made my final preparations. The expanding foam canister sat perfectly positioned beneath a thin layer of sod, invisible to casual observation but precisely aligned with Marlene's established parking pattern. Tom's security cameras were repositioned for optimal angles. Danny had confirmed that both IRS and FBI investigators would attend as interested community members. Thursday morning brought Marlene's final overreach, the mistake I'd been waiting 3 months for her to make. She appeared at my door at 8:15 a.m., dressed in her usual designer casual wear, carrying a clipboard and wearing the smile she reserved for delivering ultimatums disguised as friendly requests. "Eugene, I hope we can clear the air before Saturday's event. I know we've had our differences, but this is bigger than personal property concerns. Channel 7 wants to interview a few homeowners about community cooperation and charitable spirit. I was hoping you'd participate, maybe mention how neighbors work together for good causes." I studied her face, noting the careful calculation behind her friendly expression. She wanted me to appear on television endorsing her property destruction, providing public evidence that I'd voluntarily participated in her scheme. "What exactly would I say in this interview?" I asked. "Just that you support community charitable efforts, even when they require small personal sacrifices. That property ownership includes responsibilities to the larger community, that sort of thing." I nodded slowly, as if considering her request. "And if I prefer not to participate?" Marlene's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, the footage will show cars parked on your property anyway. It would look better if you were part of the story rather than someone who had to be worked around." Saturday evening, at exactly 5:47 p.m., Marlene's white BMW would roll across my lawn one final time, heading directly toward the expanding foam canister that would end 3 months of systematic property destruction in the most public way possible. Saturday evening arrived crisp and clear, perfect November weather that made the community center glow under the warm lights Marlene's event company had strung between the oak trees. I watched from my workshop window as the first guests arrived at 5:15 p.m., luxury sedans and SUVs filling the designated parking lot before overflowing onto residential streets. Channel 7's news van pulled up at 5:30 sharp, followed by a photographer's sedan and what looked like a mobile broadcast unit. I counted 17 people with cameras, microphones, and official-looking equipment, all positioning themselves to capture the record-breaking charitable attendance Marlene had promised. At 5:35, the valet service began directing overflow parking onto my property, just as Marlene's notice had specified. I felt my pulse quicken as the first BMW rolled across my lawn, followed by a Mercedes, then a Tesla. Each car followed the same path, guided by white-gloved attendants toward the grassy area that had once been my pride and joy. Sandra appeared beside me with coffee, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what we were about to witness. "You ready for this?" I nodded, checking my watch. Marlene always arrives at 5:45, parks in the same spot every time, checks her makeup in the rearview mirror, then makes her grand entrance. She's never varied the pattern. At 5:43, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos. "FBI and IRS in position, Channel 7 ready to broadcast live. Documentation teams prepared." "You sure about this?" I typed back. "Engineering calculations don't lie. She'll park exactly where she always parks." 5:44 p.m. Brought the sound I'd been waiting for. Marlene's BMW approaching from the street, its engine note distinctive after months of involuntary familiarity. Through my workshop window, I could see her following the same route she'd taken 47 times before, guided by muscle memory and absolute confidence in her right to use my property as her personal parking area. Channel 7's cameras swiveled to follow her approach, the reporter speaking into her microphone about community leadership and charitable dedication. Other guests paused their conversations to watch Marlene's arrival, the HOA president making her customary grand entrance to the event she'd organized. 5:45 p.m. Exactly. Marlene's BMW rolled onto my lawn, following the precise trajectory I'd calculated, measured, and planned for. Her front tire approached the carefully camouflaged expanding foam canister, hidden beneath a thin layer of sod in the exact spot where she'd parked during 3 previous charity events. "Here we go," I whispered. The BMW's front tire rolled over the hidden canister, and for a split second everything seemed normal. Then the weight of the car crushed through the sod covering, puncturing the canister's pressure seal. Bright yellow expanding foam erupted from the ground like a chemical geyser, expanding rapidly as it contacted air pressure and began its threefold volume increase. Marlene hit the brakes, but physics had already taken control. The foam expanded around her front tire, growing upward and outward, enveloping the wheel well and beginning to creep toward the undercarriage. Within 30 seconds, her pristine white BMW was anchored to my lawn by a growing mass of industrial-grade expanding foam that hardened as the chemical reaction progressed. The reaction from the crowd was immediate and spectacular. Guests stopped mid-conversation, pointing at the bizarre scene unfolding before them. Camera flashes exploded as everyone with a phone began documenting the moment. Channel 7's reporter, initially confused, quickly realized she was witnessing something far more newsworthy than a routine charity event. Marlene's car door flew open and she stepped out, designer heels sinking slightly into the soft ground, staring at the expanding foam mass that had completely immobilized her vehicle. Her face cycled through confusion, realization, and finally rage as she understood exactly what had happened. "What did you do?" she screamed toward my house, her voice carrying across the crowd that had gathered to witness the spectacle. I emerged from my workshop, walking calmly across my lawn toward the trapped BMW, aware that dozens of cameras were recording every step. I stopped beside the foam mass, noting with professional satisfaction that the expansion had proceeded exactly according to my calculations. "1 can of expanding foam," I said clearly, my voice carrying to the crowd and the news cameras. "You've driven across my lawn 47 times, caused $8,200 in damage, and filed fraudulent insurance claims for repairs you never intended to make. Now you're permanently parked here until you pay for every dollar of damage you've caused." The crowd fell silent except for camera clicks and the reporter's whispered commentary into her microphone. Marlene stood beside her trapped car, her face pale, as she realized that her systematic property destruction had just been exposed in front of 65 witnesses, federal investigators, and live television coverage. The tow truck arrived 2 hours later, but removing Marlene's BMW required industrial solvents and a hydraulic cutting system that made Channel 7's evening news broadcast far more dramatic than anyone had anticipated. The footage went viral within 6 hours. HOA president's car trapped by expanding foam during charity event racked up 2.3 million views by Sunday morning. But the expanding foam was just the beginning. Maria Santos identified herself as a federal prosecutor 40 minutes after my foam trap activated, presenting Marlene with a warrant to search all documents related to Meadowview Community Services, LLC. The IRS investigator served notice of a comprehensive audit covering 3 years of charitable tax deductions and insurance claims. By Sunday afternoon, Marlene's financial records were in federal custody, and her HOA presidency was suspended pending criminal investigation. The financial recovery exceeded everyone's expectations. Federal investigators discovered that Marlene's fraud operation had generated $127,000 in illegal profits across multiple communities, with Meadowview Estates residents bearing $43,000 of documented property damage. The court ordered full restitution plus penalties, funded by seizure of Marlene's BMW, her jewelry collection, and the Florida condo her grandmother had left her. My lawn restoration began in December, funded by federal restitution that covered not just repair costs, but improvement to original condition. The insurance company, eager to avoid fraud prosecution, provided additional compensation for my documentation efforts. My final settlement totaled $12,800, enough to restore my property and install a professional irrigation system that Sandra had always wanted. The community changes went deeper than landscaping. Meadowview Estates elected a new HOA board in January, with me serving as treasurer and implementing financial transparency measures that became a model for other communities. The new bylaws required public approval for any event using private property, eliminated emergency powers for individual board members, and established an independent audit process for all community funds. But my proudest achievement was the Meadowview Community Tool Library, opened in March in space donated by the new HOA board. Every Saturday morning, neighbors could borrow everything from socket wrenches to power tools, with me providing instruction and safety training. The program sparked similar initiatives in 4 nearby communities and caught the attention of urban planning researchers studying neighborhood cooperation. The criminal case concluded in June with Marlene pleading guilty to federal fraud charges. Her 18-month sentence included community service hours specifically focused on property restoration for low-income homeowners, a form of poetic justice that I appreciated for its systematic elegance. Sandra's condition stabilized through better medical care made possible by the financial settlement, and she took particular joy in hosting neighborhood barbecues on the restored lawn that had started everything. I built her a greenhouse that winter, complete with automated irrigation, controlled by the same engineering precision that had designed the expanding foam trap. Danny Brennan's investigative series about HOA fraud won a state journalism award and launched his career at a major metropolitan newspaper. His follow-up articles documented 12 similar fraud operations across the region, leading to federal legislation requiring independent oversight of HOA financial activities. The foam canister itself became something of a neighborhood legend, with parents using the Eugene solution as shorthand for creative problem-solving when someone seemed impossible to reason with. I kept the empty canister in my workshop, next to reliable Rita and precise Pete, as a reminder that engineering principles apply to human problems just as effectively as mechanical ones. By December, exactly 1 year after the Holiday Hope Gala, my lawn looked better than it had in 20 years. The memorial rose bush I planted for Sandra's mother thrived in soil enriched by proper restoration techniques, and the community garden project had expanded to include 3 additional lots donated by neighbors inspired by my example. Standing in my workshop on a crisp Saturday morning, I could see children playing on grass that had survived Marlene's systematic destruction, federal investigation, and complete restoration to become something better than it had ever been before.
So there you have it, one retired engineer, one kind of expanding from, and 47 acts of trespassing that end with a BMW trap on live television. Eugene's life to turn a $5 budget into the downfall of federal fraud operations. Here's what Eugene understood that most of us miss. Documentations miss angle every time. While Marlene's were destroying his law and stealing from the community, Eugene's were building a case, methodically, patiently, like the engineer he always been. He didn't just want to embarrass her, he wanted justice that would stick. That expanding from wasn't just a revenge, it was the final piece of evidence in a $127,000 fraud investigations. Sometimes the smaller actions trigger the biggest consequences. Eugene proved that when you combine patience with precision, even the most entitled tyrant will eventually trap themselves. Think about your own neighborhood. How many Marlene are out there, using their tiny bit of power to make people live miserable? Eugene's story reminds us that Billy only wins when good people stay quiet. What would you have done in Eugene's situations? Drop a comment about your HOA nightmare story. If this satisfies your justice craving, hit subscribe for more stories about neighbors who fought back and won. Remember, sometimes the best solutions come in a small cans.